Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This session is being recorded, just so you know. Uh, welcome to the Dig Your Dinner webinar. This month, our topic is leafy greens. It is fall right now, so you will find that is actually a very good time to be growing leafy greens. I am going to be going into the growing and several of the different kinds of leafy greens that there are, and then Chelsea's going to dive in with nutrition and serving. So let me get my slides shared right here, and we will get started. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm Anthony Reardon. I am the horticulture small farms agent here. I teach about produce and growing produce. I help people that are, backyard gardeners, but also people working in community gardens that are producing for farmers markets that are small scale growers. So all of those food entities, I'm here to assist. Today's topic is leafy greens, and all of the subjects that we are going to be kind of delving into come directly from the Kansas Garden Guide. This was just revised in 2023. It is a great all-over resource to utilize when it comes to vegetable gardening. So if you don't have a copy of this, I would definitely recommend getting one. Also, there's a free PDF version of this online at the link shared here. So at a glance, leafy greens sell numerous kinds of plants, right? We eat salads and we see 20 different plants in there. So we did have to narrow the specific plants we're delving into down a bit for this topic. But we are going to be talking about lettuce and all the various types of lettuce there are. We're going to briefly discuss chicories, not all of them, but the main ones. Also mustard and collards, and then arugula. Other leafy greens that you may find out there would include cabbage and kale, which we've already done a webinar over, so you can find that on our YouTube channel. And then spinach as well, which we are going to have as a topic coming in early 2025. So be on the lookout for that. A thing that, or a similar aspect that you will find between all of these plants when growing them is that they're very, very similar in the growing and in the harvesting. They're actually very easy plants to grow comparatively to a lot of your fruiting plants, since these are leaf plants where you're harvesting the leaves. All you've got to do is kind of keep them healthy and plant them, right? So we're going to briefly discuss the growing of this, but there's actually not a ton to discuss when it comes to the growing because it is such a simple process. That said, they are easy to grow in the correct seasons. So that is the main point I want you to take away with your leafy greens is that they have to primarily be grown in the spring or the fall. And that is because we have the milder temperatures there. Now, that said, fall is actually going to be your more reliable season for leafy greens, and that is because the temperature fluctuations, specifically in the spring, it happens too rapidly, going from freezing to too hot. If it's too hot, it's going to cause bolting, it's going to cook your plants. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, if it's too cold, it's freezing. A lot of your fleshier leafy greens, like your lettuce, are not going to be able to handle those freezing temperatures, and it's going to rupture those cells. That said, some of your leafy greens in the Brassicaceae family, specifically your mustard and your collards, can handle those colder temperatures because they're cruciferous. They're related to the cabbage, so they can handle the cold. Now, looking at your seasons again, springs, they can be short, so you have to keep that in mind. So it rapidly increases in temperature. So you're going to want to look at varieties that have shorter growing days specifically when it comes to planting leafy greens in the spring. And then in the fall, you can get away with your longer developing leafy greens, but you have to keep in mind as well here that the fall temperatures, they can fluctuate quite a bit. They can go from freezing to 100 degrees sometimes if we're having a non-typical fall. So it does kind of depend on the season as far as how much success you're going to have. But again, fall is going to be your most reliable time of year to grow a lot of these. The best varieties to try are the ones that are bolt resistant and heat tolerant. So those are going to be two of your biggest physiological issues when it comes to leafy greens. So try to find ones that are resistant to those two components. Flavor will decline when it is exposed to heat, um, even if the plant is heat tolerant. So one of the plants you will find here specifically like collards, that is a plant that can be grown nearly all growing season, but your flavor is going to suffer. It's going to become more bitter as that heat exposure happens. So that's kind of common amongst all of your leafy greens. It's going to become more bitter with the heat. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So as I mentioned, we're going to dive into types of lettuce first, and there's several different kinds. As you can see here, we have our head lettuce, leaf lettuce, romaine, butterhead, and summercrisp. And we're going to talk about each of these. So with your head lettuce, you need to keep in mind that this is going to have a pretty long development period, specifically because it is a head that has to form. So because of that, fall is the best time to be growing your head lettuce because it has those long cool periods in theory that can sustain that growth. Typically, this is going to take twice as long as your leaf lettuce to grow. Because of this as well, you're probably going to want to try to use transplants rather than trying to establish these from seed, because that's just going to add, essentially another month of growing time at least to even having a viable plant that can grow into a head. If you use transplants, you essentially skip that growing time and you can utilize the limited period of cool weather in the fall to establish that head. That said, the Crispino variety, as you see mentioned on the bottom over here, is a recommended variety of head lettuce for Kansas. Then looking at leaf lettuce, obviously the primary difference here is it does not form a head, and then the leaves individually are what are harvested as your crop. The most reliable lettuce type in Kansas is leaf lettuce because, again, this is just something you have to make it grow and you have to make it so that it is staying healthy. And then that's it because you're just picking the leaves off the plant. That said, there are different types of leaves that you can be utilizing here. Oak leaf and lolla types of leaf lettuce are available. If you look at this photo on the right here, on the bottom portion of it, there is some lobed leaf lettuce that kind of camouflaged into our mulch, but that is an example of the types of leaf lettuce that you can find. Some varieties worth trying in this would be your black-seeded Simpson, your new red fire, Slowbot, red sails, and prize head. And again, this will be recorded and put onto our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to, speed write down all these varieties, you can do that. And we also have a publication on recommended varieties for Kansas that these are listed in. Looking at romaine lettuce, the primary difference that you're going to find here is they have thick midribs and they also have a stronger flavor. So it's going to be a little bit more intense than the other types of lettuce that you're growing. It grows loosely and upright. So the form as well is a bit different. In that loose head, you will have a buttery yellow center, which is, a bit different as far as the leaf development of the plant. And then looking at developments, it takes longer for this to grow because it is a head type and because it is a bit larger than your leaf types or even some of your heads. Varieties worth trying here would be your Coastal Star, your Green Forest, Jericho, Paris Island Koss, and then there's even a red variety of romaine lettuce called Thurinus, which is worth your effort. Butterhead lettuce is a very, very popular type of lettuce because it's very succulent and tender, which makes it a great salad green. Specifically because of that texture. This grows in a loose head and again has that buttery yellow center. But because it is a head, it does have a longer development period, probably not quite as long as your head lettuce, but still longer than your leaf lettuce. And of these varieties, there's the Adriana, Buttercrunch, Hermosa, Harmony, Skyphos, and Red Cross. One of the things to keep in mind with all of your lettuce types, as well as the red types, are going to be a little bit more bitter, a little bit more sharp. So if you're necessarily a fan of those sharper flavors, and those may not be varieties you want to opt into. Summer crisp lettuce then has this thicker, crisper leaf to it, and is typically fringed on the edge. The biggest component that makes this a desirable lettuce is that it has great heat tolerance. So if you're trying to get something pushed through in the spring, even with those rapidly accelerating temperatures, this would be a great one to try. Just keep in mind the texture is going to be a bit different for you. But if you're looking for a crunchy lettuce, it's still a great option. It grows as leaves or a loose head. And then some varieties will germinate actually better in the hot weather. So this is a rare instance where this lettuce may actually enjoy those hot temperatures. The variety worth trying with this is called Weir. Weir, yeah. And then looking at our other leafy grains, we have endive, radicchio, mustard, arugula, and collards that we are going to dive into individually here. Endive is one of those chicories that I had mentioned. These grow similar to a lettuce, but they are going to be more hardy and compact and more bitter. You may also hear this sometimes referred to as frise. It's just another name for endive. Then your radicchio, this is a head forming chicory. So again, head forming, it's going to take a bit longer to develop. It can be more bitter and sharp in flavor, typically is. And it's a bit difficult to grow in Kansas as well because, again, it needs such a long period of cool days to develop that the fall may not even be long enough for it to grow. But fall will be the best time to at least try getting it to grow. Looking at mustard, this is one of those ones that falls into Brassicaceae family. So again, it is going to be extremely cold tolerant. This is a quick maturing plant and very easy to grow. Most of the varieties of mustard that you try in Kansas will be successful for you. That said, the variety that you are working with, you kind of need to keep in mind the ultimate purpose of it. So if you're trying to grow it as a salad green, there are salad type of uh, mustard plants that are better at for that purpose. If you're trying to use it as a cooking green, on the other hand, there are varieties that are better off for that purpose. So you need to keep in mind what you're going to be doing with these grains for variety selection. And then also remember that newer varieties that are being released are typically going to be your baby salad greens. So look for those newer varieties if you're wanting to eat it raw and not cooked. Arugula is another green that is an option. It is harvested in loose leaf form. You can always tell what it is by its long lobed leaves. This has a more peppery, tangy, sharp flavor, which is why you would be wanting to grow it. And the varieties that are recommended in Kansas, specifically of arugula, are the Astro and Sylvetta varieties. And looking at collards, this is another option in the Brassicaceae family. Again, it's related to cabbage, so it's going to have that extreme cold tolerance. But the difference between this and cabbage is not grown as a head, it is grown specifically for its leaves. So those individual leaves will be harvested from the outside inward. And this can actually be harvested, as I alluded to before, from May through November, so almost the entire growing season. But it does perform better in cooler weather, specifically because it is going to be more bitter in those hot months of the summer. You want to plant bolt resistant varieties in the spring, specifically because it has such uh, a rapid heating up. So looking at planting considerations for all of your leafy greens, you want to keep in mind that soil temperature is going to be very important. If it is too hot, specifically above 85 degrees, you're not going to get germination with most of these plants. If it's too cold, you are going to get very slow growth. So you want, again, that those mild temperatures, not just above ground, but below ground. As I mentioned, the red varieties are going to have a stronger flavor that can be more bitter to the tongue. So keep that in mind as you're choosing varieties. And then harvest can happen at any stage. That's one of the benefits to your leafy greens is that you're just pulling the leaves off, right? So even if it's a very young plant, you can be harvesting at that stage. That said, your head types, you're probably going to want to let those develop for their best performance. And then mustard specifically, you want to keep in mind that that needs to be harvested young because at an older stage, it's going to be a little bit too bitter, a little bit too woody for consumption. And then looking at growing and harvesting, after you have planted, you want to maintain consistent soil moisture. So this is a high water crop. because you essentially need that water in there for the plants to perform well. More so than any other plants. They all need water, right? But this one is one that needs consistent water. It's also a high nitrogen crop, so you want to side dress the plants when they are half grown. And I have here when necessary or if necessary, specifically because I think with some of your leafy greens, they grow so quickly that you may not need to be supplementing nitrogen necessarily every time. So you just kind of want to stay on top of how much nitrogen is present in your soil and how much has been, in theory, used up throughout the growing season. When harvesting, you want to pull the individual leaves on your leafy types from the outside in, and then heads, those can be pulled whole, including the roots during harvest, and then you can just trim those roots off. After harvest, it's best with your leafy greens to be consuming those ASAP because they tend to wilt and dry out quite quickly. So you want to try to prevent deterioration as best you can and try to keep them dry. Looking at common concerns, again, most of you're going to be seeing physiological issues that are occurring with these types of plants. So bolting is where the plant is essentially creating a flower stalk. You'll see that in the top left photo over here of a lettuce head that is about to flower. This is caused by heat. So again, you want bolt resistant varieties. Sun scorch is another thing because these are fleshy, tender leaves. So you'll actually see on that photo as well in the bottom portion of it, some browning on the edges of the leaves. That's an example of sun scorch. And then bitterness is a common aspect that you will see with your plants that is again accompanied by the heat. So you really just got to be growing in the correct season. Flea beetles are common with these greens because they eat leaves. So neem oil will deter flea beetles in this instance. Aphids, again, they eat leaves and they siphon juices from the plants. So neem oil again will help. In this case, they actually smother the bugs. And then cabbage worms, specifically for your collards and mustards, may become an issue because they affect all types of cabbage. So in this case, Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria, also known as BT, can be applied to the plants to control those caterpillars. But you want to make sure that they are cabbage worms and not beneficial caterpillars that are, going to butterflies. And then quickly, something fun. I mentioned in my fun facts around some previous Dig Your Dinners that, this is a very old crop. It's been harvested for 4,000 years. It's been harvested for 5,000 years. Lettuce and leafy greens have been harvested for 200,000 years. So basically, since the dawn of humankind, this is one of the earliest crops to ever be cultivated or foraged by humans. And it was actually, in addition to being a food source, an important source of hydration because the plants they do consist of so much water, up to 95% water. So it was providing them with both water and food in those early days of humankind. So with that, I will open it up to questions real quick, anything that can be answered now, and then I will stop my screen share here and Chelsea can get ready. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, I will let Chelsea jump in.
All right. Go in here. Perfect. If you have questions that come up on Anthony's presentation, just put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation as well. So I'm going to talk about kind of nutrition and eating them. Now that you spent all the work on growing them, what do you do with them? So first I want to start off that fruits and vegetables are an important piece. However, vegetables we need to consume more of. And so the general recommendation is that we need 2 to 3 cups of vegetables per day. However, when we talk about our leafy greens, it's actually more that we need. So leafy greens, because they're not as dense, if we think about broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, even some of our carrots and all those other ones, they're denser. And so our leafy greens are not as dense. So you actually need to eat 2 cups of raw leafy greens to be the equivalent of 1 cup of that vegetables that we need. So you would have to eat, say, 4 cups of leafy greens to equal those 2 cups of vegetables that we need per day. Generally speaking, the darker the green or the darker the leafy green, the more nutrients. Anthony had said that your reds are going to be more bitter, but on the flip side, those are going to be a little bit more nutritious. They're going to have a few more of those strong antioxidants and powerful nutrients for us. So you kind of got to pick what are you going more for. However, I do want to emphasize that all vegetables are good for you. So no one leafy green is the healthiest. You'll hear people say that spinach is a superfood or kale is a superfood, and it is, but it doesn't mean that it's the healthiest. My question to people when they say they don't like kale or spinach, but they like their traditional iceberg lettuce that is kind of the foundation of what we know of on salad bars and served in different settings, is that's great. If you like that iceberg lettuce, go ahead and eat that. It's still going to provide good nutrition for you. It may not have as many nutrients, but it still is counted as our vegetables. It still has fiber and it still has a lot of beneficial components. So I just want to stress that although we're talking about leafy greens, that all of them are good, and it's really just incorporating them into your diet in whatever way, shape, or form. So why should we eat leafy greens? They are pretty affordable, whether you grow them yourselves. They're pretty abundant. You tend to get a lot when you grow them. They're affordable in terms of accessible for a lot of different economic statuses. They're available all year round, whether you grow them in the spring or the fall for yourself. Anthony had mentioned that some of them are available to be grown pretty much during that primary growing season. And then you do have some local ones, local farmers who might have greenhouses that they grow them all year round, or obviously they're available from the store all year round. There's lots of nutrients. So in this presentation, unlike previous Dig Your Dinners, I'm not going to go into the specifics because we are covering so many of the different leafy vegetables, the leafy greens. However, just know that they all are pretty similar in terms of their calorie content, their nutrition. Some are going to have a few more maybe vitamins than others. Some might have more vitamin K, but others might have more vitamin C. But just know that there's lots of fiber, nutrients, antioxidants, and everything that is important for our bodies to stay healthy and to function. Leafy greens are an easy way to get lots of vegetables. If you've ever had a salad before, you know that it fills you up quite full, and it's a good way to just get a lot of that good, powerful nutrition in one setting. And the fact that we do need to eat more vegetables in general. So incorporating our leafy greens into that is a good starting point. So this next slide just kind of is a snapshot of where we're at with our dietary intakes. This is for the current dietary guidelines, and they will be reviewed and updated starting next year. So these statistics are a little bit older, but you can see the blue line is kind of the percentage of population below recommendation. On that left-hand side is our vegetables. We do not do a very good job of eating our vegetables. That first column is our total vegetables, and then that second column is our dark green vegetables. So you can see that we don't get enough of those dark green vegetables, which these leafy vegetables are counted in that category. So to start off, we're going to talk about lettuce, the reliable relative. And I say reliable relative, it's because it's what we all know. It's what is usually easily available. It's what is commonly grown. And so Anthony talked about each of these, and I'm just going to briefly cover some additional points into what he added. So we know that our green and red leaf lettuce, it really pairs well with any type of salad ingredients or dressings, whether it's a vinaigrette, whether it's an oil, or it does hold up pretty well to those more heavier dressings that we think of. It is soft and tender and has a very mild flavor, which is why it pairs really well with a variety of ingredients. And then moving on to the iceberg lettuce. Again, it's kind of like the most famous lettuce, what we think of. Now we have a lot more varieties and people are eating a lot more different ones. But when I think of lettuce, I always just think of, this traditional kind of shredded iceberg lettuce. It is, as I mentioned, not quite as nutrient rich compared to other lettuces, but actually has more water compared to some of the other lettuces. So again, it's still great for us. It still provides hydration. It does still provide nutrients, although not quite as many as, say, a romaine or a red leaf lettuce. Then moving on to romaine. And when we think about romaine, we typically think about our Caesar salad. That is the primary lettuce that is used in our Caesar salad. And it's a very sturdy lettuce with a nice crunchy texture. And so that's why it's primarily used. Because it's very sturdy, it actually holds up very well with those creamier, thicker dressings, like a Caesar dressing that is on it. You do want to use primarily the heart of the leaf. Those outer ones are more generally bitter. And so removing those and kind of getting to that core and the heart is going to provide you with a sweeter salad. And then last, we have our butterhead lettuce. As Anthony mentioned, this is that soft, buttery texture. So it does work great for a lot of salads. And what this one is primarily used for in a lot of situations is for wraps. So when people are choosing to either not eat a carbohydrate or they would just want to try something different, they can easily use this and fill it with a taco meat or some other type of filling. And kind of, it's a nice little cup that holds all of those great ingredients and it's easy to eat. So then moving on to arugula, this is the spicy relative. So this is the one that it's going to have that peppery taste, and it has kind of small leaves. Traditionally, I would say an arugula is not ate as a salad alone. It is usually in combination with other leafy greens because of that more peppery taste. It is smaller as well. So certainly you can definitely eat arugula as a salad by itself, but it's generally mixed in with other salad greens. It can also be used as a garnish in a lot of situations. You might have it on a plate with some meatballs or something else just because it is a smaller lettuce. And so that color adds a nice pop and without overpowering the plate or the dish or whatever it may be. It is also traditionally added to pizzas when we think about our leafy vegetables and our leafy greens. You might have spinach added to pizza, but arugula is kind of one of those that adds a nice taste and adds some pretty color to a pizza. So arugula does contain nitrates. And the reason I mention this is because studies have looked at nitrates and their beneficial effect on reducing our blood pressure. So nitrates are turned into nitric oxide in the body, and that actually may help open those blood vessels and help reduce blood pressure. Chicory. So this is the unique relative. When we think about these, they're kind of that unique, different thing that we might not traditionally think about and also just incorporate in different ways. So we have our endive that has a nice nutty and mild bitter flavor. It can be eaten raw or cooked. It is slightly more bitter, but is milder than some of the other chicory family components. And then the last one, we have our radicchio, slightly bitter flavor, colorful, crunchy leaves. Nutritionally, when we compare these, we would assume that the purple has more color and more nutrients. And it does. It has more of those antioxidants. But again, both of these are nutrition powerhouses and have a lot of nutrients that are good for us and have different antioxidants and polyphenols. Mustard greens. Mustard greens I associate with the well-traveled relative. They're peppery, sharp tasting. They are usually consumed boiled, steamed, stir-fried, or pickled to make them more tastefully and palatable. You usually do want to cook this in some type of fat and add an acid, and this just helps balance that sharpness of that flavor that's traditional of the mustard greens. Interestingly, we've talked about kind of raw leafy greens, but when we think about the cooked aspect, when we compared raw mustard greens with 1 cup of cooked mustard greens, the cooked ones actually have a higher level of vitamin A compared to the raw ones. They also have higher vitamin K, which you can see they're 690% of our daily value, and copper as well. But on the flip side, we have lower vitamin C and E. And this is because these vitamins are more heat sensitive. And so they're the ones that are lost when we heat or cook something traditionally. And then we have pickled mustard greens is actually quite common, which is why I mentioned this as kind of the well-traveled relative. They're pretty common in different parts of East and Southeast Asia in these different cultures and different cuisines. So Japanese, Vietnamese, and Chinese cuisines have a form of a pickled mustard green. One word of caution with the mustard greens is if you are prone to kidney stones or if you have had your doctor tell you you need to avoid foods that are high in oxalates, the mustard greens do contain oxalates, and so just being aware of that compared to some of the other leafy greens. Then collard greens. Here we all know the collards are more of a southern dish, and so collard greens are our southern relative. They're commonly consumed cooked. However, they can be eaten raw. The raw collards have a sharper, more bitter taste, and so that's why traditionally they've been cooked. When you cooked the collards, they have a more earthy, milder taste. The collards, they do have a more mild and less bitter taste than kale. And like kale, they do have kind of that hard inner stem. And so if you desire, you certainly can remove that hard inner stem before eating. Some people may leave it in. You can consume it. It's just a little bit harder and doesn't cook down quite as well. So they are part of the cruciferous family. And so as we know, broccoli, cabbage, broccoli and cauliflower have been shown to be connected with a reduced risk of cancer when consumed. And so although specific studies and research have not been done on leafy greens, like specifically on collard greens or even the mustard greens, we know that because they are part of these other families of the other vegetables, that they may have similar properties and may have similar health effects, such as reducing cancer risk if you consume these. And again, it is a staple in Southern cooking. So that's some images on the right-hand side there about some different ways to cook. So preserving leafy greens, you actually can preserve leafy greens, although I would say a lot of people don't, but traditionally you're going to preserve your mustard greens or your collards. Your leafy lettuces, you're not going to preserve them. Spinach does hold up well for preserving, so we'll talk about that, as Anthony said, in a later session. But your other traditional leafy lettuces, like your red and green leaf lettuce or your iceberg lettuce, is not going to preserve well. If you do preserve your mustard greens or your collards, they are a low acid vegetable, which means you must pressure can them, and you should only can freshly harvested greens. So if you harvested your greens and they've been sitting for a week or more, you wouldn't want to can them. You would want to use fresh harvested greens. To do this, you do need quite a bit. So you can see you need about 18 pounds of leafy greens to get 9 pints, or 28 pounds to get 7 quarts. We do want to hot pack only, and hot pack means that you are going to basically blanch them and have them in a hot water bath before cooking down a little bit before you would put them in your jars. You're going to blanch them, as I said, and then you're going to add some salt if you desire to each of your jars. You're going to add your chopped up greens, and then you are going to boil them in a pressure canner. So your processing times, 70 minutes for pints or 90 minutes for quarts. So it's a long time. They have a higher processing than some other traditional kind of pressure canned vegetables, but you do have that at that longer, higher price, not price point, time point. Preserving leafy greens, you can dehydrate them as well. So you'd want to blanch them as if you were freezing them. You'd blanch them and kind of let them cool slightly. And then you can put them on your dehydrating trays. You're going to want to dehydrate them around 140 degrees in an oven or dehydrator. And if you keep them in large pieces, you might want to just kind of flip them over or rotate them during that drying period to allow for even dehydrating. Vegetables, especially your leafy greens, can scorch quite easy, especially at the end of the drying. So you do want to monitor them closely as that drying time comes to completion. Your drying time can vary. It can take as little as 6 hours or up to 10 hours, depending on how long it takes. If you are using an oven, just know that that's probably going to be double that time frame. What can you do with preserved dehydrated leafy greens? You can add them to soups, stews, or other dishes. And there's been kind of a number of people have been dehydrating their greens and then have been pulverizing them and making them into a powder and then adding that into, again, your soup stews. You can buy your powdered greens from any kind of convenience store, CVS or grocery store these days. So it's pretty similar of just a dehydrated pulverized green that you can add to different dishes. And then freezing, you do want to blanch those leaves. Again, that just preserves them, keeps the quality a lot better. There's 2 ways that after you blanch them to freeze them. You can either dry pack them, which means you are going to basically just stuff them into containers, or you can tray pack. And tray pack means that you're going to basically lay them out in a single layer and you're going to freeze the leaves individually. And so with this, they're going to freeze and then you can transfer them to your container. With this one, you don't need to allow any headspace because they've been frozen kind of as individual leaves. And so they're not going to expand or group together as if you were kind of just putting them all into one container. So now moving on to a few recipes. So here, as I mentioned, the butter lettuce works really well for kind of a boat or an avenue to stuff different mixtures in. And so this is a Mexi walnut and sun-dried tomato. So this is a vegetarian option. However, you certainly could add some ground beef or other type of chicken if you desire. So we have some walnuts and sun-dried tomatoes, carrot, celery, some cilantro in our taco seasoning. And then basically you just mix all that up together. If you were using meat, you'd want to make sure that that meat is fully cooked. Season it, and then you basically just stuff it into a little butter leaf and kind of wrap it all up and eat it that way. And now we have a red leaf salad with roasted sweet potatoes and green beans. This is actually be a great fall dish, especially as the holidays come up if you are growing red leaf lettuce in your garden beds this fall. This just has some sweet potatoes, some fresh green beans. You certainly could use frozen green beans or canned green beans, your red leaf lettuce, and you have a maple mustard dressing. And so that dressing consists of Dijon mustard, some apple cider vinegar, and some maple syrup to cut that bitterness and tartness of that vinegar. You'll cook your sweet potatoes, roast them in the oven. You could certainly roast them in the air fryer if you choose to do that as well. You'll blanch your beans and then you're just gonna toss everything together and do your dressing and then coat your dressing. You could add any type of cheese you would like to this. You can even add some chopped walnuts or some pumpkin seeds, whatever you like to add some additional crunch to it. And then here's a very simple collard greens. You know, I think collard greens are underutilized. I love collard greens and they're quite available, but basically it's pretty easy to use them. You can pan fry a bunch of collard greens and a red onion in some olive oil or butter just until they're softened. Add some spices, so some garlic, salt, pepper, and if you want some chili flakes, and then you're just going to kind of cook that a little bit more to get those spices all mixed in. What's great about this is you just then kind of toss it with some cooked pasta, add a little lemon zest and lemon juice. Again, as I mentioned, you'll kind of want to add a little acid to cut that bitterness of your mustard or collard greens, and then top with some Parmesan cheese. You certainly can add some, if you're going to make this more of a main meal or add some more protein, you can add some bacon. Everybody loves bacon, or another protein like a chicken breast to this dish. And with that, that is the end of kind of the nutrition piece. So if there's any question.
Chelsea, I believe there's one question here in the chat for you. It says, any tips or recipes for turnip greens?
Yeah, so with turnip greens, it's really pretty similar to some of these other greens. It really to the sauteing. Turnip greens are typically used in a cooked format versus a fresh format. If you put your email address in the chat, or if you want to private message me your email address, I certainly can get you some more specific recipes on those turnip greens, but it'll be similar to your mustard and collards and just cooking it with some oil and an acid potentially. And then same with Swiss chard. Any ideas what to do with Swiss chard? Swiss chard goes great with soup. So adding some Swiss chard to like a white bean soup instead of a kale. There's a traditionally kind of, you'll find a white bean kale soup, but you could add it to a white bean soup, white bean chicken chili, add some Swiss chard in, or your frozen Swiss chard is going to be best thrown in soups or casseroles. It's not, you certainly can thaw it and kind of try to cook it up fresh, but that quality is going to deteriorate a little bit to eat it plain as a side dish. However, certainly adding it to a hot soup or a casserole is going to be your best way to go with that Swiss chard.
And we do have a question here that says, is it too late to start growing? With that, you're going to need to look at the varieties you're growing, and you're probably going to want to specifically be growing the leafy harvested greens. So no head lettuce at this point, but you can still do your leafy lettuce. Generally, those shorter growing day to harvest varieties, it's going to be about 10 days. So with that in mind, if it's germinating in 10 days and we're not getting any early freezes, you can still be getting a harvest out of your leafy greens, getting them at least to a medium size to be harvested for salads, etc.
Great questions. Are there any other questions? Or any other things of, this is a time to also share. So if anybody has used not Swiss chard, but has used mustard greens or collard greens or have any other recipes of how they've made them, please do share in the chat or unmute yourself. Awesome. Well, you know how to get a hold of us. If you have any further follow-up questions, we will be sending this recording out so you can go back and listen to it after and get any more information and get the recipes. There's one more question for you, Anthony.
Yeah, it says, will kale overwinter? Not necessarily. It is going to be killed by the freeze eventually. It will get down, especially here in Kansas, or northeast Kansas, northwest Missouri. It's going to get cold enough that those cells will rupture at a point. But because it is in the Brassicaceae family, you can still push it a bit, probably down to mid-20s, before it finally succumbs to the cold. So kale does need to be replanted every year. It won't overwinter. And I'll add on to what Chelsea was saying. Next month's Dig Your Dinner webinar is going to be on broccoli and cauliflower. That registration is already up online. So if you're interested in hearing about that, please register. And then the one for November is going to be on sweet potatoes. So we've got a good lineup for the rest of this season of Dig Your Dinner. And then we also have a plan for all of 2025 to be rolled out as well. So be keeping an eye on that. And then there's a comment in here that says, I've seen dinosaur kale take a hard cold. So yeah, there may be some varieties that can handle it better. So that can be an aspect to look for as well. Some of your lacinato kales may be able to last even longer than your leafy kales or your flat leaf kales. Okay, with that, we are going to wrap up. So thank you everyone for your time, and we will see you next month.